Hello, my friends. Mrs. Surratt here, one of two videos to help you catch up with Unit 1. Perhaps you started late or perhaps you just got behind, but Unit 1 is really important because it kind of gives us the basis of all the other units. So I wanted to give you a quick catch up and kind of review the highlights and also let you know where some of the important information that you may want to check out is in Unit 1. So hopefully as we go through this presentation, by the end, you will no longer be like Mr. Castle struggling to figure out what to say. So this is one of two videos, and today we're going to focus on kind of the approaches and the beginning of psychology, and in the next video, I'll talk a little bit about research methods. All right. So psychology wasn't always known as a science. Believe it or not, it was kind of a philosophy, if you will. It was just sort of seen as a pseudoscience. And a pseudoscience is some kind of a belief that we can't quite test and prove scientifically. So, for example, things like religion, astrology, palm reading, handwriting analysis all kind of fall into the category of pseudoscience. We have a belief in them, but maybe there's not really been scientific evidence to back it up. Now, it doesn't mean we can't believe it. It just means that according to science, it's not really a science. People would offer theories and ideas about psychology going all the way back to Aristotle and Socrates, but there was really no way to test them. But this changes in 1879 thanks to a gentleman named Wilhelm Wundt, who begins incorporating the scientific method into the study of psychology. So the idea of creating a hypothesis, observing, experimenting, and then drawing conclusions. So this changes psychology radically, especially because he's also set up a lab. So now there's actual ways to observe and control your situation. And so by doing this, psychology moves from the realm of philosophy or belief into an actual official science. So let's start talking about the major approaches of psychology. And I'm going to start with sociology. Some of you may have studied this already. It's also known as the sociocultural approach of psychology. And when you talk about the sociocultural approach, you're focusing on how culture and society affect us. So what behaviors are we learning from our culture or society? How do we act based on our culture? Basically, kind of the external things that are um, causing us to believe or act or perceive things in a certain way. And it can affect a wide variety of issues like gender roles, sexuality and beauty, ideas of right and wrong. We can keep going with that list. But basically, the socioculturalist is looking at, for example, our ideas of right and wrong. Which of these ideas did we get based on our society or culture? And keep in mind that every society or culture is different. So one thing they're looking at is whether or not we behave appropriately, for our society or culture. Because sometimes people would consider someone who behaved appropriately for a different culture as abnormal. But are they? Or are they just not behaving appropriately for the culture that they're in? It could include things like religion, the media, it can include traditions, any sorts of things that you could be affected from your society or your culture. Next, we're going to move on to behaviorism. Now, I think behaviorism is probably the trickiest of all the approaches because unlike any other approach, it's completely external. Behaviors don't care about emotions. Behaviors don't care about motivation, what's going on inside your brain. None of that matters. Behaviorists care about your external observable behavior. So how do you as a subject respond to an external stimulus in the environment? For example, sorry, she's going to shoot me, but my daughter just sneezed. And if I was to say to her, bless you, okay, I'm responding to an external stimulus in the environment. So it's not, did I say that because I love my daughter or I had this deep feeling? No. Whether or not, what was the behavior, and then should we keep the behavior? Should we change the behavior? So is it appropriate to say, excuse me, bless you, or is that something we should change? And I'm sorry, Poe, behaviorism has nothing to do with your feelings. It's all about your external behaviors. Now, when you're talking about a behavior, if you want to change it, or if you want to keep it, you would use either what's called a punishment or a reward or reinforcement. Now, we think punishment, we think mom takes away our cell phone. We lose we get grounded, maybe a spanking. I mean, everybody's different, right? But punishment really just means anything that's going to reduce the frequency of the undesirable behavior. Okay? So, for example, if my daughter is sneezing because she has allergies and I make her take her allergy medicine every day, yeah, believe it or not, that's a punishment if it's reducing that undesired allergic reaction. Okay, I know you're thinking, wait, how can that be bad? But again, you've got to be careful with behaviorism. It's not about good or bad. It's about how do we react to our environment. A reward is something that's designed to enhance the frequency of that desired behavior. So if every day that my daughter takes her allergy medicine, I let her have a Hershey Kiss, let's say, that could be a reward. Okay, or maybe I don't have her do a chore because she took it without my prompting her. So rewards are anything that will enhance the frequency, and punishments are anything that will decrease the frequency. Now, if I haven't messed with your brain enough, let's talk about positive and negative, because positive and negative are totally different with behaviorism. When I say positive, you think good, happy, nice, right? Not with behaviorism. When I say negative, you think, oh, bad, mean, ner. No, again, not with behaviorism. Positive simply means I'm applying a stimulus. So if I give my child a spanking, that's a positive punishment. I know, right? But in behaviorism, I'm applying the stimulus and I am doing something to decrease the frequency of an undesired behavior. That's a positive punishment. It sounds like an oxymoron. I gotcha. What about if I'm saying to my daughter, going back to her, go clean up your room. When are you going to clean up your room? You haven't cleaned up your room. You haven't done your laundry. You haven't done this. And I'm always nagging her. And then she goes and she cleans up her room and does her laundry, and I stop nagging her. Well, I'm not applying anything. In fact, I'm withholding, and I am not nagging her anymore because I want to keep that behavior of her cleaning her room. So that's a negative reinforcement. Again, I know that sounds crazy. You'd think this is awesome. She stopped nagging me. But negative means that I'm withholding. And reinforcement means it's something designed to enhance the frequency of that behavior. So behaviorism is probably the trickiest one, and we'll talk all about that in Unit 3. But it just sounds crazy. It's not the way we're used to using these terms, so just be careful with that. So let's imagine, for example, a student that I had in U.S. history class. And what he did was, it was like one of the second or third classes. At the end of class, he comes up to me and he says, hey, can you go back through some slides with me? I said, sure. Next thing you know, we're going through almost every slide. And I'm like, well, maybe he just didn't get it. So the next class, same thing. So I said to him at the end of class, dude, what have you been doing all class? We went through this. And he goes, oh, I was playing video games. And I'm like, wait a minute. You want me to go through this with you again because you're playing video games? And he said, oh, but you're the cool teacher. You understand. It's okay. And I was a little annoyed. I said, dude, you're wasting my time. So next class comes along and he says to me, hey, will you go back through these? And I said, you know what? Please go watch the recording. If you need some help, let me know after you've watched the recording. And every class he would ask me, I'd say, please go watch the recording. So what's going on here? Well, as a behaviorist, how would I handle this? I would need to look at his observable behavior, which is that he's not paying attention. And there's a secondary behavior, which is that he's seeking out personal time with me rather than going through the lesson with the entire class. He's sitting there, he's logged in, but he's not going through it until the end. So as a behaviorist, I'm not going to ask him, well, how do you feel about U.S. history? Are you motivated by school? I'm just going to look at his behavior and say, should we change it or should we keep it? So that's the question. What behaviors is he exhibiting? What behaviors do we need to change? And what's the most effective way to alter this behavior? So for example, my response was just to say to him calmly, hey man, go watch the recording. Let me know if you need help. That was it. That's all I said to him. Is my behavior, is my reaction a reinforcement or is it a punishment? Well, I don't want to keep the frequency of him asking me. I want him to start paying attention in class. So I'm using a punishment, something designed to decrease the frequency of him trying to get that personal time and not paying attention. And FYI, I have no problem with the student asking for personal time, but he was ignoring the class, and what's the purpose of that? And then the question is, do I use a positive or a negative punishment? Well, I chose to withhold my attention to him, so that would be a negative punishment. So that's how we would look at that. All right, let's say I say neurobiological. What would you see when you see the word neuro? Hopefully you think of your brain. And our brains can be tricky things, but we want to think about, for a neurobiologist, we want to think about how is our brain genetically wired? How does it function? What are all the pieces and how do they work together? What chemicals or hormones might be affecting our brain? If our brain is out of balance or our genetics or something's out of balance, how do we rebalance that, possibly with medication or therapy? So neurobiology is considered kind of the hardest of the psychological sciences, if you will. It's the hardest science of the approach because it's really about kind of measuring levels, scanning and looking at the different physical parts of you. Let's imagine a friend named Herbie who saw someone drop their book. Herbie walks over and he picks up this book. So here we have, excuse me, our friend Herbie and the person he's helping, the young lady. And as a neurobiologist, we would want to think about why would Herbie be motivated to do this? Again, we're not necessarily going into emotion, but what's going on in his brain? For example, you might notice that Herbie's a guy, this is a lovely young lady. So perhaps it's all about the chemistry between the two. What kind of neurons are firing or what kind of neurotransmitters are going through? Maybe Herbie has felt this, maybe he has genetic predisposition to help other people. Maybe he has kind of an overly developed frontal lobe, or maybe his frontal lobe is developed to the point where he could make this decision to help someone. So the thing about psychology you need to remember is we're not just concerned with what's abnormal. We kind of need to focus on what goes right in the brain as well as what goes wrong. The approach of humanism, being the best human you can be. Humanism is all about taking control of your life. Now, keep in mind there is kind of this literary and historical idea of humanism that focuses on the human over the divine or over the king. But this is all about, in psychology, it's about you as a person taking control of your life. And what kind of personal growth have you demonstrated? That's really important. It's emphasized. How can you grow to be the best version of yourself? Now, we're not talking about some crazy idealized high thing that you could barely ever reach. We're just talking about where are you now? Where do you want to be? And how do you get there? That's what we mean. That's self-actualization, the idea of personal growth, bringing us to knowing ourselves the fullest that we can. So as we meet our physical, social, emotional needs, we can move on to become a better version of ourselves and continue to grow, to be better. So let's think about Herbie, going back to help that student pick up her books. What would a humanist think about this situation? Well, a humanist might say that Herbie has reached a point in his life where he has met his own needs and can now focus on the needs of others. They might also think about what helping this person brings to Herbie, maybe a sense of connection with another person, maybe the chance to fulfill the desire to help others. So a humanist would look at where this is and whether or not this is a positive step showing personal growth or a negative step. Does he need to go in a different direction? All right, any Harry Potter fans out there? For those of you who don't know, this is a scene in one of the movies where Ron, who's not pictured in this, who's the third friend, this is Harry, this is Hermione, and Ron's the redhead. Ron has joined a team, the Quidditch team, which is their sports team, and he was so nervous before the game that Harry pretended to put this little vial in his drink called Liquid Luck. And the idea is that if you take it, you become very lucky. Ron drank the glass, feel like, oh yeah, I drank this Liquid Luck. He goes out and he plays this like perfect game, wins the game, saves the day. He's the hero. And Hermione starts yelling at Harry, you should never have given it to him. But then Harry shows her, I didn't. I just made him think I gave it to him. And Hermione's kind of surprised by that. And she realizes that it was Ron's thinking that led him to do so well. Excuse me. So The question with cognitive is, how do emotions and our perceptions affect our thinking? So how does our sensation of the world, how do we color that, and how do we think about the world? And cognitive psychologists are interested in our mental development, the various stages as we grow. So if you think about it, when you were in elementary school, you thought very differently about the world than you do now in high school. And I got news for you. You're going to think differently about the world when you get to be older. So cognitive psychologists are looking at our mental development, our moral development, our sexual development as we grow and kind of how that changes. So what if we had a new student who wouldn't join into any groups at his new school? How might a cognitive psychologist approach his situation? Well, that is a really good question. Chances are they're going to look at their thinking. They're going to look at what they think about the school, what they think about maybe the move made them angry. How are they thinking about the world, and how can we change that? Or maybe they look and realize that there's nothing to suit the student's interests. So how could we change their thinking? Maybe get them involved in something new, maybe help them create a new club. All right, the last approach I'm going to talk about here, I know, yay, is evolutionary. And evolutionary stems from an approach called functionalism, which isn't used very much. But the idea in functionalism was, how did our senses and minds evolve the way they are? For example, I always ask students, how come we smell with our nose? Why don't we smell with our ear or our eyes? Why did our ears have the function of hearing and our noses have the function of smell? That's what functionalism was all about. How did our minds and senses function? Evolutionary psychology kind of came from that and says, how is our minds, how is our thinking, our senses, our behaviors, how have they evolved as response to our environment? And you can look at short term, just back to the family, or you can look long term back further. This is often used with prisoners, as psychologists will be looking at family history, their environment, genetics, all of these things to determine the causes of their behaviors, the likelihood of them committing crimes, what led them to the place they're in now. And that can be used with other things as well. All right, my friends, thank you for watching. I know this is a little bit long, but there's a lot of really good information in here. I'll be back with another video to teach you about research methods and how psychologists have learned all the things that they have learned. So, thanks, guys.